What's up, man? What are you doing? Yeah, I just got after like a really cold shower trying to warm up. Someone told me like it helps like reset all your hormones if you take like a really cold shower for like 3 or 4 minutes. They said there's like these studies that showed that like it does that. Really? I know there's some people talking about that, but what's that? Well, they also told me there's these studies with this tea that if you drink it, it helps like boost up your metabolism to like get everything like back in line and help you like lose weight to be again like be a lot healthier. I don't know, man. Did they tell you the names of them? Did they at least show them to you to like prove what they were talking about? Well, no, I didn't see the studies, and they just said that there were, but I mean I see that stuff all the time, and you could just find a study really like on anything. You can find a study that would just tell you just anything. So I think it's just kind of hard to say that like studies show things. Like how true is that? I understand that people say that all the time, but there are ways that you can tell if a study is actually a good one or not. And if you want, we can go through those coming up. In this video, we will discuss the things to look for in a research article to tell if it's a good one or not. Research is something that is very important for many different fields, from healthcare to economics and everything in between. But it can be hard or confusing to know what is worthwhile to read and pay attention to and what is just garbage. Now, you may have heard people say, oh, you can find a study on anything. Well, that may be true, and maybe you can, but some of them aren't even worth the time to look at. Now, before we get started, let me say a couple things. The examples and the references I use are going to be more along the lines of medical research because that's an area that I'm most familiar with, but these principles and things do apply to other areas. Additionally, this is a lot of information, and I did my best to condense it as much as you can. And if you like, you can use the bookmarks to hop around and go to the sections that you want or go back to them. So let's dive in. We'll start right off with something that needs to be known and can be investigated pretty quickly, and that is who or where the study was published. The reason why is because there are good places where research articles are published, such as high-quality journals, and there can be very questionable places, such as unknown newsletters or what we call predatory journals. You may be wondering, what is a predatory journal? Because I just said that. It is a journal that will literally publish anything that is submitted to it, no matter what it is about, as long as the authors of the study pay the publishing fee. There have been examples where people have submitted papers about how they raised someone from the dead. And, that's not, accurate whatsoever. And it was actually published. Now, what separates these two between a really good place where research is published and what is not is what is called the peer review process. A peer review process is when people who are in the same field or area of expertise review the article. Now, they aren't just looking for like spelling and grammar mistakes, but they're digging into that article, that research, and asking questions. They want clarity. And they do this because they want that research to be very clear before it is published. So what they will do, they will go through, they'll ask their questions, send that back to the authors. The authors clarify it, answer those questions, send it back. And this goes back and forth for quite a while. It could take several weeks to several months. Now, for those more questionable ones, they may just read it over, say it's fine, and publish it. I have literally seen articles that the date of submission, peer review, and publication were all on the same day. Now, you want to know why, because most people don't know the difference between any of these publishers. And they just think that just because something is published and out there, that means that it's good. So if you want to check and you can confirm where a study is published, you can check on a couple different things. In the actual citation, there is the name of where it is published. And sometimes it's in italics or in parentheses, depending upon whatever source that they or method that they use to cite it. And you can look up that journal on a search engine such as PubMed, Google Scholar, or at the directory of open source journals. And if you can't find that journal on any one of those, it's most likely one of those questionable ones. Moving on to the next thing, we want to look at who paid for the study. There are two things that need to be kept as minimal as possible for a study to be considered a good one, and that is biased and chance. Bias is when there is an influence or something to the study, so the researchers or somebody, again, paying for the study has a level of influence, and that can change the outcomes. Chance is just like a fluke occurrence that something happened, and this could be good or bad. So, when we look to see who paid for the study, that makes sure that there was no bias introduced. A good example of this is with tobacco companies. So saying a tobacco company wants to prove that smoking is not bad, they pay for a study and possibly could even have it done in their own research labs. And because they pay for it, they're more likely going to find outcomes that line up with them. So this is actually stated in the article. It must be stated. And if it's not there, there could be a chance that the authors just don't want you to know. But a good study will state that there was no financial interest, that no one paid for the study, so that there was no financial backing or influence from any outside organization or person that was involved with the study. All right, now let's look at the next thing. I will give you a little bit of a heads up. This section may be quite long, but it is pretty helpful to understand when anyone starts talking about a study. And that's what kind of study it is, because there is a hierarchy of evidence, as it is called, meaning that some studies are better than other ones based upon how they are designed. So let's start off right at the bottom, the lowest tier of it, and that is what is called anecdotal or expert opinion. The easiest way of thinking about this, it's the trust me bro, as the gym guys say. And that's just someone giving their expert opinion. So like saying an apple a day will keep the doctor away. So somebody saying, if you want to stay healthy, just eat an apple every single day. It's not really based in anything, and they may not be able to produce any other research to support it. It's just something that they say. It's just something that they believe. I'll use a real life example that happened not too long ago. Talking to a gentleman who was a personal trainer, and he was saying that to get the most optimal results with people so that they get stronger and they lose weight and they decrease their chance of injuries, they don't need to use barbells. So only using dumbbells and machines, because nothing in the body is straight like a barbell, and that's going to lead to injury. Well, when asked, what is what kind of evidence do you have for this? He just said, it's just my years of experience. So this is what is said, that this is just an expert opinion. Now, this doesn't really hold up to anything else. If someone just has an anecdotal evidence or anecdotal study, it doesn't hold up to any of the other studies. Now, the next step up from that are what are called case studies. And a case study is looking at one person doing something. Now, you remember those two things that we talked about that we want to keep as low as possible, that it is bias and chance. With a case study, chance is higher, meaning that the outcome could be good or bad just based on just random occurrences. Now, if we look back at like that trainer, if we want to design a study, if he wanted to design one, or if we wanted to design a study like that, we can take somebody and just use dumbbells with them and see what their outcomes are, to see, do they lose weight? Do they get stronger? Do they have a decreased chance of injuries? And whatever the results are, we can get that. A case study can't stand up to the other studies that we're going to talk about next because, again, there is that risk of chance. There also could possibly be some bias by the person doing the study, and there was nothing to compare it to. So if you get these results, they could be better, they could be worse, or no different than anything else. So we don't know how good the outcomes are because, again, it wasn't compared to anything. Case studies are beneficial because if something does show promise and does show something, it can lead to these next levels. So moving up again, to make a study look better, we need to add more people to it. And that's what a cohort study does. It looks at a large group of people over a period of time to see the outcome of something. And so again, you get that benefit from having that large number of people. Now, there are two types. There is a retrospective study, so retro, looking back, and a prospective, which is looking forward. So again, if we want to talk about our barbell, dumbbell example, we could just take a large group of people, so people that all come into a gym, nobody uses a barbell, they only use dumbbells, and we see what the outcomes are. We can see, do they lose weight? Do they get stronger? Do they have a lower risk of injury? Now, there are drawbacks to cohort studies. One is they can take a long period of time. If you're trying to look at the outcomes of something over a year, 5 years, 10 years, you have to do it over that year, 5 years, or 10 years. So they can take a long time to do. A drawback to that long time as well is that you lose people. People don't come back in for the follow-ups. They fall out. So the overall number of people that are studied end up shrinking over time because you just lose people. And also, just like the case study, there isn't anything that's being compared to. So those outcomes may be better, they may be worse, they may not be any different. But like I said, they can be something very good to see the effect of something over a long period of time. So stepping up from the cohort study are what are called randomized controlled trials. And this is what most people think of when they think of a research study. It's a simple example is that we're going to test two groups of people. We want, this group of people to try this thing, but then this group over here doesn't try it. And we want to see the outcomes of it. So everyone in this room, we're just going to split down the middle and put them in these two groups and then just compare the outcomes. Now, you can expand this in several different ways. You can have more than two groups. So Group A does this thing, Group B does that thing, and Group C doesn't do either one of them, and we compare all against one another. With this type of study, you can really lower those two things that we talked about, the risk of chance and the risk of bias. So you're lowering the risk of chance because you're just mixing up people. So they're just randomly being put into either one of the group. You're also lowering that chance of bias by either not telling the groups that they are the test group, or that you're telling both groups that they are the test group. And you can even lower that bias more if you have the people that are conducting the study don't know which group that they are working with. And that happens often with medication. If they're going to test this group that is taking this medication and this group is taking a sugar pill, there can be another set of researchers who are giving the first set of researchers a random one that they don't know. So again, you're just decreasing that chance of bias in it. Now, going back to say, again, we're going to keep using this. Going back to our barbell study, we could just say, you know what, we're going to test this. So everyone that comes in through the gym, as they come in, they're going to be put in a group that's either just doing barbell work or just doing dumbbell work. And then over a period of time, we can compare those against one another. Now, at the very, very top is what are called systematic reviews. And this is when you take as many studies as possible on a subject and compare them all together. This allows a large amount of information to be compared to reach a conclusion. So again, if we want to use our barbell study, we can find every single study about the use of barbells or dumbbells and any of that and compare them all against one another. And we get this large amount of information and we can reach a conclusion. I will say systematic reviews sometimes have a few drawbacks. One is that the people putting together the systematic review can be just limited in what they can find. So not every study is freely available that you can just search on the internet and find. Some of them are behind paywalls. That's because the journals that own them, that are publishing, only allow them to out to either people who subscribe to that journal, which those journals can be very costly, several $100s for some of them. Or they say, if you want to read this study, you have to buy it. And these studies are not cheap. They can run anywhere from $50 to $100. And you do run the risk as the person putting the systematic review together that you get that article and lo and behold, it has nothing to do with what you are researching and you just wasted that money. There also could be a level of bias because the authors putting it together are only getting the studies that line up with their belief. Additionally, if these studies out there are only very, very weak ones that are not very good, so again, those lower tier ones that we talked about, and you're just throwing together a bunch of real low tier ones, that can really make a systematic review not very good. And you remember those predatory journals we talked about a little while ago? Same thing, because they're published and they're out there, they could be included in these things in a systematic review as well and just bring down the quality, or it could just be a bunch of them on there. So we'll say, even if you get a systematic review, it does need to be looked through and just to make sure that the studies included in it are good ones. I will say, this is something that is overlooked by people when they talk about a study. They want to believe that every single study is the same, that they are valid no matter what. But keep in mind, they fit upon this hierarchy. So if somebody says one, you may want to look up what kind of study is it and where does it fit in that hierarchy. All right, let's really dive into that study now and look more into it. And one thing we want to look at is who was being studied, meaning that was it on people or was it on animals? Now, I understand people have their beliefs about this, and I'm just stating it. Now, at times, there will be studies conducted on animals first before they can be conducted on humans for a number of reasons. One is safety. It can be very hard with some of the laws and things to start testing things on humans first. So they may go through animal testing to see like what are the outcomes with animals. And if they're good, then they can move on to testing in humans. Also, with animals, they can often control things. They can control the environment, their diets, the things around them to see what the results are. Now, I will also say animals and humans sometimes have things that are pretty similar. So you may not be able to test this in a human, but you can test it with animals. And I will say in the rehab world, there are two studies that we kind of all know. One of them is about rat tails, and that looks at tendons because rat tails are kind of similar to tendons. So they looked at how these rat tails acted, and they were able to apply that over to how human tendons work. And there's also talk that there is work about how the spine moves, and they were looking at pig spines. So keep that in mind, that it could be an animal trial. It could be looking at something with animals and not actually humans in the study. All right, so we've confirmed that it's not animals, it's conducted on humans, but was it on an actual living human? There are studies that are done on cadaver, so non-living tissue, and it's just a way that they are able to see what goes on inside the body because they were able to take something out and see how it moves or see what it does. But this is the thing, non-living tissue doesn't always act the same as living tissue. Okay, so now you've looked to see, is it conducted on animals or living humans and things like that? Let's look more at the actual population that they were studying. When studies are conducted, they have things that are called inclusion criteria. This is just a list of things that they're looking for in the people that are doing the study, the subjects of the study. So for example, they could say the inclusion criteria is that the person has to be between the ages of 18 and 60, a non-smoker, and have type 1 diabetes. This allows people to see it and volunteer themselves for the study. There is a flip side to this, and that is called exclusion criteria. These are things that would remove somebody from a study. So, for example, we could take that same inclusion criteria, but have exclusion criteria, saying that if a person's BMI is over 25, they're pregnant or have 2 or more diagnosed health conditions, and they don't sign the paperwork to consent to the study, they may be excluded from a study. I say this because this could affect the study because it's only looking at a very, very specific population. So the outcomes of it are going to only apply to them. An example could be, again, based upon the inclusion and exclusion criteria. When they got to the end of the study, the only people that were left in it were people who were between the ages of 24 to 30, who were male, exercised a minimum of 3 times a week. They had a BMI under 25, which means that they weren't overweight. They were non-smokers and had no diagnosed health conditions. So this means that the results of that study would most likely benefit or have the most effect on those same type of people. And so that can be a very, very small group and not actually apply to everyone. The number of people in a study can make it a good or a poor one. So the more people who are in a study, the better. This just means that the risk of chance is lower. A good study will have a minimum of 30 people, but it's better if they can get 100 or more. So if you see a study that only has like 5 people in it, it may not be a good one. I will say this though. There are conditions and things out there that are pretty rare or uncommon, and it can be hard for researchers to really get that higher number to make a study really, really good. So that sometimes does get brought into account when looking at a study to say, well, we're looking at a very, very specific population that there's only about X number out there. So this overall study, again, is just not going to have a lot of people because this is just what we had access to. The next 2 areas are really big to know because these areas get misquoted the most. The first is actually what is being studied. This can get misquoted because maybe the researchers were looking at something very specific in their study, but the people that read it, that just pick it up and look at it, try to apply it to something that's very, very broad. I'll use this example. Again, this is coming from the rehab world. There's a group of people that really just don't like squats with the barbell. So putting the barbell on your back. I know I've been talking a lot about the barbell. And they quote this study about the use of a single leg squat, saying that it shows that back squats are bad. So the barbell back squat is a bad one. But when you actually look at this study, they were studying what the muscle activation was in the leg when the person was doing a single leg squat with their foot in a certain position. And so there was only a single line in it that said like, oh, a single leg squat could be beneficial with people with low back pain. It never said anything about the back squat or barbell squat being bad. So that study was only studying what was muscle activation in the leg with a single leg squat with the foot in certain positions. So when you're looking at the study, you may want to dig down and see what the researchers were actually doing. So maybe they were doing only something for a short period of time, or maybe it was just one exercise. Maybe the exercise or something was in a specific range, or again, like their foot position. Maybe they were just giving education on something and it wasn't really an actual treatment. So all that being said, when you see the study, you want to dig down and say, hey, what exactly were they studying? And lastly, what are the actual results of the study? This is probably the one area that is misquoted the most, not only by people who just pick up a study or hear about a study, but it can be done by the researchers themselves. And we'll talk about that here in just a moment. So what can happen is that somebody sees it and they don't fully explain in detail what the outcomes are. This is an example. So somebody saying, oh, well, this study says that if you eat this food, you will lose weight because there's a study that said that. Well, if you look at the actual study, the people in it ate that thing and only lost 1 pound over 6 weeks. Well, so technically, yes, they did lose weight, but is really a pound over 6 weeks really significant? The authors can play into this as well, and there can be a couple reasons for it. So again, if we use our example from just a moment ago, so saying they did the study, if you eat this, you lose a pound over 6 weeks, and they could just report it as saying, oh, if you eat this, that you lose weight. And typically, they will just put that very broad explanation in the abstract. The abstract is a section in the very, very front of the article that just gives a quick summary of it. And these are usually very widely available. People can just read that, and they don't actually give the details of it. Now, you may be wondering, well, why would they misinterpret their study? Why would they do that? Well, researchers sometimes want their work to be published. They want to get it out there. They want to get it into other journals. They want people who are doing other research to cite their articles to say, hey, this person's article is really, really good. So they may do some of that so that they get some traction. So people come to and read that article, or maybe use it to quote it for very similar things over there. So it can just get them more credibility down the line. So with all that being said, it's at the end of the article, look at it. What are the actual results? A good study will break down what the actual results are, and then you can make a determination on, is that actually something that is significant, or are they maybe just kind of like misrepresenting it? Whew, that was quite a bit. And thank you so much for hanging in there. This can get so much deeper, but I just kind of want to cover some of the highlights about it so you can be better informed when somebody comes at you with a study. Remember to look for those things. Who and where it was published, who paid for it, what kind of study it is based upon that hierarchy of studies, who was studied, what was studied, and what the actual results are. So when you check all of that, you'll know if it's a good study that's worth listening to, or just something that is just thrown out there and can be misleading. And you can use all this information to keep yourself strong and healthy. Thank you for tuning into the video. If you enjoyed it, please hit that thumbs up button. If you have a question or comment, drop them down below. And please consider subscribing to the channel, because all this information that is provided is to keep you strong and healthy.